We're going to take a look now. This is the DeckTech deck walkthrough for the Splice deck. If you haven't checked out my article, I am writing a kind of a mini-series regarding popular mechanics in Magic, specific spell mechanics that we have been introduced to, and trying to build decks that use these mechanics and kind of show how they interact with each other and current games, etc., and doing so within a budget of $20. Now, this is the deck that I put together for the Splice mechanic. Splice was a mechanic that was introduced during the Kamigawa block. They put out a whole bunch of spells that you see here. We'll use Glacial Ray as our example. It has the spell type is Instant Arcane. You see the Eerie Procession here is Sorcery Arcane. So they had all these spells that were quote-unquote arcane spells, and with Splice you could, whenever you played an arcane spell, you could pay this Splice cost here at the bottom. That went away, but you could play the Splice cost at the bottom to add this spell onto the other arcane spell. So, for example, I pay the 3 mana to play Eerie Procession. Clearly gonna have trouble with all these words. So I play this. It's an arcane spell, and when I play it, I have the option to splice another one onto it. I tap an additional 1 colorless and 1 red to splice the Glacial Ray. And now if this card clears the stack, not only do I have the effect of searching for a card that the Procession gives me, but I also deal the 2 damage to a creature or player, and at the same time I keep the Glacial Ray in my hand. All you do to have this in effect is you pay that additional cost and you reveal it to your opponent, and then this card now reads search for an arcane card, shuffle your library, and deal 2 damage to target creature or player. So that's kind of how it works. It's really kind of a nice thing for hand advantage, because of the fact that you do keep the card in hand. The one thing I will say is that it can be very mana intensive. That's a 5 cost for this. So to be able to pull off the actual splicing of spells, you really need the extra mana to be able to make it all happen. If you want to check out the article, you can see all of the I kind of put hopefully a simplified version of some of the rules regarding Splice and how it works, in case you're not familiar with it, and some of the judgings or whatever you want to call it for how it works and some interactions. But anyway, so the main thing of this deck, I went red and blue. It's kind of a popular thing when it comes to Splice, because of the options we had available. Most importantly is this is going to be your I Win card, is the Ire of Kaminari. And this card is a 4-cost instant spell, and it deals damage to target creature or player equal to the number of arcane cards in your graveyard. So the idea is that just about every spell in this deck is arcane, except for the 4 copies of Hinder, and we'll get to that in a second. But you play all these instants, you're drawing a lot through most of these spells. At the same time, you're splicing other things onto them, and you're building up your graveyard with these, and then at instant speed you can use the Ire to burn them for whatever damage may be left after self-damage, lava spikes, and glacial rays. So this is really your win. You're definitely going to run the full set. Now I did say I am running 4 copies of Hinder. It's kind of nice because it keeps in the flavor. They were printed in the same block, so it's a nice counter spell even with that aside. It's the problem is the fact that it is not an arcane. If you check out the example game, it did come to the point where I ended up losing the game to my opponent because I miscounted, and I needed to do a certain number of damage to him, and I had that many cards in my graveyard, but I was not conscious enough to realize that one of those cards was a Hinder, so it left him at 1 life and enough to win it, when I did have another card in my hand that I could have played to get the full damage to win the game. We'll just throw it that way. So hopefully that made sense. If not, go check the example game. You'll see it in action. But Hinder is a great card. I definitely think it's necessary to the deck. But at the same time, be aware of the fact that it is not an arcane spell, and it will not increase the count on the Ires. Definitely want to keep your graveyard open in this matchup so that you can pay attention to what's in it. And before you cast an Ire, just double check to make sure you haven't, had to discard a land, or there's a hinder in there, something like that, that's going to mess up your count. So, like I said, the deck's very mana intensive. Your best card here is really going to be this, Reach Through the Mists. You are running a lot of draw spells, but this is going to be your best because it is only a 1 blue. This is your basically your ideal splice target because it only increases the splice cost by 1. One of your, this is another card here, Consuming Vortex. I really like it. Return target creature to its owner hand, but the cost, it only costs 2 to play it, but to splice it is going to cost 4. So to play that in addition to, say, Procession is going to be way out of hand. That's going to be 5 plus 2 blue that you're going to need to make that combination work. So it's almost better. This is why Reach Through the Mist is really kind of your MVP, even though it's only draw 1 card, is the fact that this only becomes a 3 and 2 blue to play. Like I said, this deck can become very mana intensive, so you want to be definitely aware of that, especially when it comes to these vortexes. Most of the splice mechanics are equal or lesser value than the cost. Let's take a look here. The Puppetry costs 1 blue to play. The Glacial Ray is the same cost if you hard cast it or splice it. So just, you have to be aware of numbers. So, definitely a full set of those because it is your best option for splicing. When it comes to draw spells, we are also running 2 copies of Sift Through the Sands, which is great. If I've never gotten that second part. It says, the second part here is if you cast the spell name Peer Through the Depths and the spell name Reach Through the Mist, you may search your library for a card named the Unspeakable. There's no Unspeakable in this deck. To be able to cast those all in one turn is very rare anyways. So, just it's basically going to read, pay the 3 and draw 2 cards and discard a card. The discard is kind of great because of the fact that it allows you to continue to build up your arcanes, but again, be aware that if you do decide to discard a land to that, it is going to affect your Ire, and the count on the Ire. So next up we have Peer Through the Depths, another one. Look at the 5 cards and you get to choose a card from among them. So it's not essentially draw, but it is fantastic because it works almost like a tutor. A lot of great stuff with that. We also get the Eerie Procession. In between these, you should be able to find some answers you need, whether it's the Glacial Rays, whether it's a bounce or a tap. This deck is really kind of working towards just stalling out an opponent until you get to the point where you can play enough Ires to win the game. Whether that's 1, whether it's 2, it doesn't matter. So let's basically start from the beginning with the control aspects here. I'm running 3 copies of the Consuming Vortex. Like I did point out earlier, it does cost more to splice it than to play it, but you want to splice it more often because it's all about card advantage. And when you splice it, you keep the card in hand, and you get an extra. It's like having a second vortex available to you. And I have, in the example game, used it a lot in the splicing, and then it did come to a point in time where it's like, okay, I'm out of options, I don't have the mana, I need to hard cast it. So you do have that option, but I definitely recommend that you splice it whenever possible, so that you can get the max use out of your cards. Next up we have Dampened Thought. This is a one of, just because it's kind of an alternate win condition. It's probably not going to win you games. It may at some point cause your opponent issues. I thought it was nice to have kind of the oddball toolbox option. We're working with splice mechanics anyways. To be able to get this one randomly in there, is definitely a great thing. I can't see you actually decking out an opponent with it, but you may just use it a couple times to screw them up enough to give yourself an advantage. It's one of those cards that really can't hurt you, and it fits the flavor, so that's why I added it. I'll be perfectly honest. But next up we have Eerie Procession. I talked a little bit about this. It's basically your tutor card for arcane spells. Help you find whatever you're looking for. Definitely works great. this deck is all about drawing cards and digging, and that's why you have so much in your drawing, and you're spending all these cards to dig up. It's adding to your Ire count the entire time. That's really going to be your focus in this deck. Full set of Glacial Rays. It's one of the best splice cards available, in my opinion, because of the reusable burn. Again, whenever possible, cast it for its splice cost as opposed to hard casting it, because it gives you that card advantage. Hinders to deal with threats. We do have, the burn in the Glacial Ray. You can burn out a creature with Ire. We have some tap options, but occasionally there's something that's going to be too hard to deal with. Some threat, of an artifact or an enchantment that you need to really get on top of right away. So the hinders are there for that. We talked about Ire, that is your win condition. We're running 4 copies of Lava Spike. This is kind of essentially the same thing as Reach Through Mist. It's a necessary thing. It's an arcane spell. It's only going to cost you 1. So it only adds 1 cost to your Splice count. It's not as good as Reach Through Mist, however, in my opinion, because, sure, it does the damage to your opponent, which you need, but I like the card advantage that Reach gives you. Either way, they're basically interchangeable. They're going to be your cheap option for splicing spells. So you want to be able to use those as much as possible. The deck is, like I said, very mana craving. It's very hungry for mana. So you're going to want to be able to splice these as many times as possible. We're actually not running terribly many splice cards. There's basically the 3, but that's all you need. They're kind of something you don't want to overwhelm the deck with, because you want to be able to have the arcane spells to balance it out. We talked about the peers and the draws here. Just a little more control. We have 3 copies of Psychic Puppetry. This allows you to tap out a creature. If you're stuck on a one mountain and you need kind of a second, you can for whatever reason you can use the puppetry to tap the blue to play the puppetry and untap a mountain after tapping it. Just grant the mana. You know how it all works. Most of the time you will, however, like I said, use it to be tapping out creatures and kind of stalling out your opponent. This is another one for stalling out your opponent. Toils of Night and Day allows you to tap 2 permanents or untap 2 permanents. So you're going to be able to use that one as well to tap out creatures. That's basically the deck. Like I said, the point is you want to burn down your opponent, draw as many cards as possible, splice whenever you can, and bomb them out with Ire. So hopefully you like this deck, you give it a try, and definitely check out the example game.